G'day everybody, Sean from Bourbon Brothers here with our third tasting video for our September pack. We're looking at the Rowan's Creek Straight Bourbon Kentucky Whiskey from the Willett distillery. So the story of Willett begins in the years following the repeal of Prohibition. It includes over 100 years of history and a brand new distillery. The twists and turns are as pronounced as the bends in the Rowan's Creek namesake stream that courses across the distillery. John David Willett was born in 1841 and served as a master distiller for a distillery near Bardstown, Kentucky until 1876. His son Aloysius Lambert Willett was born in 1883 and also went into the distilling profession. He later purchased the distillery and founded the Willett Distilling Company in 1936, 3 years after the repeal of Prohibition. During the 1940s, the family-run distillery would take advantage of the post-Prohibition boom in bourbon sales to introduce the old Bardstown Kentucky Straight Bourbon whiskey brand. A few decades later, during the 1960s, the Johnny Drum Bourbon brand was introduced. The narratives around many bourbon brands have a few common threads, one of which is the sales slump that hit the industry in the 1970s and 80s. Behind the popularity of James Bond's shaken but not stirred martini, clear spirits like gin and vodka became all the rage, while bourbon and scotch became known as dad's drink. As a result, sales volumes plummeted of bourbon and rye whiskey in the United States. While some brands were able to weather the storm better than others, this period in bourbon history changed the fortunes of the Willett family dramatically. Sensing the game was up on bourbon sales in the US, the leadership of the distillery decided to cease distilling bourbon and lease the equipment to producers of ethanol-based fuel alternative to gasoline during the height of the 1970s oil crisis. However, they continued to mature bourbon in their warehouses and bottle products as a non-distiller producer. The gasohol fuel product never panned out as a consumer commodity, but the bourbon brands they launched found continued success. From the 80s into the new millennium, the outfit operated as a non-distiller producer and wholesaler under the name Kentucky Bourbon Distillers Limited, KBD, under the management of Thompson Willett's daughter, Martha Harriet Willett, and her husband, Evan J. Coolsveen. The couple continued to increase regional sales by launching the small batch boutique bourbon collection, which included Noah's Mill, Kentucky Vintage, Pure Kentucky, and Rowan's Creek, initially released with a 12-year age statement. Unfortunately, not there anymore. The company continued to take advantage of renewed interest surrounding the bourbon renaissance that began in the 1990s. They introduced brands under the namesake Willett brand name during the 2000s and into the 2010s. But as their distribution continued to grow, so did the strain on their avenues of sourcing. As the popularity of Willett portfolio continued to grow, so did the number of competing NDPs producing quality products. About this time, the Rowan's Creek age statement was removed from the label. To shore up supply chain issues, the Willett distillery began to produce its own whiskey again in 2012. A 24-inch continuous column still, cookers and fermenters, and a brand new Vendome copper pot still were all installed on the site. Although it continues to be considered a craft distiller by the Kentucky Distillers Association, the site has the production capacity of other mid-range facilities recently opened in Kentucky. Willett's production team utilises 4 bourbon grain bills to produce Rowan's Creek whiskey and other brands. We will call these recipes 1 through 4. Bourbon mash bill number 1 contains 72% corn, 17% rye and 15% malted barley. This recipe is associated with the old Bardstown bourbon brand. Bourbon mash bill number 2 is 79% corn, 7 rye and 15 malted barley. Bourbon mash bill number 3 contains 52% corn, 38% rye and 10% malted barley. And bourbon mash bill number 4 is a wheated recipe, which is 65% corn, 20% wheat and 15% malted barley. Master distiller Drew Coolsveen has said that the wheated mash bill is taking up a hefty share of the production schedule in recent years. As barrels reach maturity and peak flavour, the blending team has a broad range of tastes to pull from when blending each batch. Today, production occurs under the direction of 5th generation master distiller Drew Coolsveen, grandson of Thompson Willett. He's been positioned as a bit of a wonder-kind within the Kentucky bourbon community. The Willett distillery reopened in 2012. From the time the original stills went silent in the 80s until the opening of the new facility, Rowan's Creek was a sourced whiskey. Small batches of bourbon ranged in the numbers of barrels, mash bills contained in the batch, and maturation durations meant bottles sampled throughout the years have varied more than the typical large brand. Rowan's Creek is considered a small batch bourbon, but with its new production equipment now online, the company has flipped the table. Willett and KDB can now utilise excess capacity to meet the sourcing requirements of other brands if they choose. As mentioned, when it was released, Rowan's Creek had a 12-year age statement, but today offers no age statement. Willett doesn't disclose the barrel char levels either used for the maturation of its whiskies. This may reflect the long history of Kentucky bourbon distillers as an exporter, independent bottler, broker, and non-distiller producer or an NDP. In the past, KBD sourced the barrels for their brands, including Rowan's Creek, from a variety of suppliers. The Heaven Hill distillery is literally right down the road, but the company also sourced barrels from Jim Beam, who used number 4 char, or Four Roses, who used both number 3 and number 4 whenever they became available. As a result, the blending team became adept at blending small batches of whiskey to create flavour profiles paired with each specific brand offering. So that's a little bit about Rowan's Creek. Let's give it a shot. So immediately you'll get large amounts of sultanas or raisins on the nose. Very creamy with vanilla tones, a little bit of dark chocolate in there, and a light and well-disguised proof level. Clearly it's been in the barrel for several years and has an immediate aged oak taste, alongside the high rye standard pepper and spice hit with a nutty aftertaste. Coffee is also present after that sort of initial visit. That finish, it's medium to long, which does stick around on the tongue. It's got finishing notes of oak and a lingering spiciness. So that's the Rowan's Creek. That's our 3 bourbons for the month of September. I really hope you enjoyed them, and I hope you're enjoying your journey. Cheers. As a result, sales volumes plummeted of bourbon and rye whiskey in the United States. What do you reckon? You reckon get away with that?
I can just get away with that.
Hey?
I can get away with that.
Done. Straight.
No, straight as an arrow. Off its shaft.
Willett's production team utilises 4 bourbon grain bills to produce Rowan's Creek. The Wascally Rabbits.
Rowan's what? Sorry.
Today, production occurs under the direction of 5th generation master distiller Drew Coolfiend. Drew
Coolfiend.
The Willett distillery reopened in 2012. From the time the original stills went silent in the 80s until the opening of the new facility, Rowan's Creek. Oh, I nearly did it again. Felt myself going quick.
It's a W in the Romans, I guess.
So that's a little bit.